Alrighty, so today we're going to cover a new clause, a SQL clause, the where clause, and so far we've been sort of looking at we're just pulling basically all rows from tables, and so this is the where clause is, although it's technically optional, pretty much every query you ever write is going to have a where clause to filter down the results to just those rows that are relevant to what you're doing. And then we're also going to talk about, after that, we'll talk about a few tools in business intelligence, the explain plan, the BI metadata, some other things that'll help you both test your SQL and make sure that, and find what you need, what tables you need, what columns you need, that sort of thing. So, but we'll kick off with the SQL side of things. So last week we were looking at this query, the product groups table, and just selecting some columns. So we'll start with that, kind of continue using that as an example, but filter down our results now with the where clause. So the where clause comes after the from clause, and it contains one or more conditions that must be true in order for that row of the table or tables to be returned in your results. And so the structure of those is usually a column from one of your tables, some sort of operator like equals or greater than or less than, and then some value. And we'll go through a bunch of different operators that you can use. Equals is probably the one you're going to use the most, but we'll cover a few other ones that are also useful. Sure. All right. So this specific where clause is saying that the value in the product groups column of the product group column of the product groups table must be equal to 14 in order for the results to be returned. And so when Oracle runs that, it checks every row of the table to see if that's true, and it disregards all the rows where it's not true. And so there's only one row in that table where that's actually true, and that's the one. So the GL product group is 14. The description of that is books. And so there's the operator we used is the equal sign here. The opposite of equals is not equals. And so you can write that with equal sign with an exclamation point right before it, in which case yours, and then you can also write it as two greater than, less than symbols. Both of those are equivalent. And we'll return all the results where that is true, so where it's true that the product group field is not equal to 14. So everything but 14 will be returned. Another really commonly used operator is the in operator. And in is, it's kind of like equals for a list. So if the product group is equal to anything in the list in the parentheses, so you use the in operator with the list in parentheses, each value separated by commas. So basically we're saying here that if the product group is equal to 14, or it's equal to 15, or it's equal to 64, then return those results. 64 actually isn't a valid product group, and so we only get two results, 14 for books and 15 for music. And it has an opposite. In this case, it's not in, and so this will return everything that's not in that list. Then another operator, like I said, greater than and less than are valid operators as well. So in this case, saying return anything where the product group field is a value less than 14, in which case, well, there's only two, the -1 and the 0. Which you won't want to run into much in other tables, probably. There's also greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. And between, which you tend to use a lot with dates, but we'll talk about dates in a few weeks. Here I've used it for the product group field again, and saying that return any record where the product group is between 20 and 27. And the between operator, the thing to remember is that it's inclusive, and so if the value is 20 or 27 or anything in between, it will be returned. So you'll see that 20 gifts and 27 VHS, technically video, are both returned as part of the set, as well as things in between those two. There's also a is null, and that's to look for any record in the table where there's nothing in that field. So there aren't any product group fields that are null, so I switched over to creation date here. And so we're returning all the records where the creation date doesn't have anything in it. And that's different than 0. 0 is something that represents nothing, whereas null is nothing. And it has an opposite, is not null. So that would return anything where the creation date is not null. And then, let's see. So then we get into the like operator. And the like operator is used for finding, it's usually used in combination with wildcards. And the most common wildcard being the percent sign. And the percent sign will replace one or more characters with, so in this case, probably the example is the best way to describe this. So it's looking for anywhere where the short description field has a string in it that has these two characters at some point in it, and some stuff before it and some stuff after it, or no stuff before and after it. It goes in single quotes because it's a text string. I think we talked a little bit about that last week maybe. Text strings are always put in single quotes. Numbers don't need the single quotes. So this would match to 3 values. This is sort of theoretical. It would match to things like tools, toys, big tops, or any other text string that has capital T, lowercase o in it. It is case sensitive. So this is like possibly the only time that SQL is case sensitive is when you're putting things equal to things inside single quotes. So when you're establishing a specific text string. And there's a way to get around that I'll cover in just a second. So in this case, it matched to toys and tools because both of them have a capital T followed by a lowercase o. It didn't, however, capture auto or stones, both of which have TO, but it's not an uppercase T, and so it ignores those. But we can get around that by using either the upper function or the lower function. In this case, I use the upper function. And the upper function, you just type upper and then parentheses around whatever the column is that you want to force into all uppercase. And so while the where clause is being evaluated, while Oracle's going line by line through your table and saying, okay, is the short description field, does it match this condition? Before it tests whether it's like that string, it converts whatever's in that field to uppercase, and then it tests whether it's like capital T, capital O with something on the front or something on the back potentially. And so that you want to make sure that your text string that you're setting equal to is all in uppercase too. And in that case, it catches toys, tools, auto, and stones because it didn't because we've converted both things to uppercase, and so it basically forced it to ignore case. And you'll notice that in our results, it wasn't in uppercase because we didn't put the upper function in our select clause on short description. So the select clause, if you remember from last week, always controls what your result set columns are and what it looks like, whereas the from clause says what tables, and the where clause tells us how to filter those results down.
Can you combine multiple likes?
Yeah. In just a second, I'll talk about sort of combining multiple conditions. And
if you're doing the like, if you want to look at multiple types of text strings, then you do it with an and discrete.
Yeah. So yeah.
If I only want to select toys and tools, so if I remove the first person, will it select only toys and tools?
That's correct. Yeah, if we removed the first percent sign, it would only find text strings that started with the letters TO. Yeah, exactly right. That's a great point. All right, and not surprisingly, there's a not like function. So if you want to find everything except for things that are like a certain string, you can do that as well. And worth noting, not equals to and not like and not in, they don't return nulls. So even though a null isn't like or equal to a 1 or equal to shoes or anything like that, it's the way Oracle thinks about nulls is they're not equal to anything and they're also not equal to anyway, yeah, I think you get it. So you have to handle them a little specially. So you can use that is null if you're looking specifically for nulls. You can also use this function NVL, and that basically converts anything that if it's going through those records and it finds that that column, what's in that column for that row is null, it translates that into whatever you tell it to translate it to. And so in this case, the way you use that function, similar to what we did with the upper, we took the short description column and we wrapped it in the function NVL. So it starts with NVL, start of the parenthesis. And in this case, there's something additional. You put a comma, and then this is what the SQL will return anytime it finds a null in this column. And then it evaluates whether the result of that is not equal to CE. And so here, if it finds a null, it's going to translate a null into unknown, and then it's going to say, okay, is unknown not equal to CE? That's true, so it should return that result. So we get the nulls as well as the things that are not null and not equal to CE. All right. And then, so of course you can, yeah?
Can you specify something for a specific text with a certain number of characters and on the left or the right?
You can. Yeah, so there's a second wildcard that you should have read about in your training manual that's an underscore. And the underscore represents a single character. And so if you want to control, there should be one character before, and it can be anything. You can use that underscore instead of the parentheses. Or, sorry, not the parentheses, the percent sign. Yeah, great point. All right. So, so sort of what Jeff was talking about, you can have multiple conditions, because those could be multiple like conditions. They could be multiple equals. They could be mixed. They can be on the same column or on different columns. In this case, and you separate those most often with an and. And so if our where clause contains two conditions, like here, and they're separated by an and, then both of these have to be true in order for the row to be returned. So it has to be true that the product group field is populated with a number between 20 and 27, and it must be true that the creation date field is not null. So
Question. Dates are sensitive to putting a lower date ahead of the farther date. Is that true with numbers at all or no?
Right. So if you're using that's a really great point that I failed to mention on the between operator. So the between operator it's directional. So the lower whatever the lower thing is should be the start, and whatever the larger thing should be the end. Yeah, yeah, and text as well, because you can use between on text strings as well, and it'll sort of alphabetically sort them. So yeah, great point. Yeah. So I think I have, oh no, I don't have actually results. So the other thing you can do is use an or instead of an and. So in this case, it's saying where either the product group must be between 20 and 27, or the description is not electronics. So it's going to find any results where either of those are true. And you can, so here we've added a third condition, and you can use parentheses to control the order of operations and what's lumped together. So here we're saying that the product group must be between 20 and 27, and it must be true that either the short description is null or the creation date is null. And so in that case, we get product groups between 20 and 27, some where the short description is null, like these two, and some where the creation date is null, like these two. And some where both are true. Now, if we took the parentheses away, here we're saying that the product group should be between 20 and 27, and the short description is null, or it's adequate that the creation date is null. So in this case, because there's no parentheses, the or becomes sufficient to return a row. So if the creation date is null, regardless of what the product group is, regardless of the short description, now that single condition is adequate to return a result. And so we get results like these, where the product group isn't between 20 and 27, but the creation date is null, and so that row is returned. So when you're working with ors, not so much with the and, if all your conditions are and this and that, but if you start doing multiple conditions that use the or, then you start to maybe think about how those need to be grouped with parentheses.
Can you go back 2 slides just where the parentheses are?
Oh, yep. So here it's the and applies to everything in the parentheses. So this must be true and everything in parentheses must be true. Or whatever the parentheses result is, it must be true. So, and in parentheses it's or, so either of these two. All right. That went faster than I thought it would. So now we're going to jump over to some of that. Well, actually, why don't I stop? And are there any other questions on the where and filtering results before we move on to some of the other tools? All right.
Sorry, just a general question.
Uh-huh.
Typically best practice to include like a null or not null just to control, to make sure that you're receiving all of the columns that are available?
That's a tough question to answer. It kind of depends on probably the table, the column in the table, and what type of data might be there, and whether it might be null, and whether you care about the nulls. It's a great segue actually into one of the things we'll be looking at, the BI metadata, where we can see all the tables in the data warehouse and all the columns in all those tables, and whether that column is nullable, in which case there could be nulls. And so that's when you have to think, okay, do I care if there's a null, and do I have to correct for that in my conditions? But yeah, a really, really good point. Also, excuse me, last week, I think it was Kate brought up that I had mentioned, think about a business question that you might have that you want to try and answer as you work through this class and get the tools you need to be able to answer it. And last week we didn't really have enough tools to even start thinking about that. This week, when we have the BI metadata and some of these other tools, you'll be able to start investigating, okay, what's the table that might have the data that I need to answer that question? And has someone else already tried to answer that question? And is there a starting point already out there? So, but we'll kick off with the explain plan. Whoops. Sorry. There we go. So the explain plan, it's basically a way to test your SQL to make sure that the syntax is right and that the query will run if you attempt to run it. And the way to there's a couple ways to get to it. From the main DataNet page, you'll see explain plan tool up here in the resources. But I like to always run it from within my query itself, and so we'll find, oh no. There we go. Apparently I was not connected. There we go. All right. So I'm going to go to My Jobs, and we'll pick something recent, or actually, I'll just pick one of these guys. So once you've created your job profile, you've added your publisher and filled out the job section, and you've got your SQL set up down in this section down here. At that point, then you can start to run the explain and analyze function. I'm actually going to go change the SQL here to something a little more straightforward. I think I've got yeah, we'll start with this guy. All right, so that was, I think, the query we ended up with at the end of last week, that just simple selecting 2 columns from the product groups table. And here, we can click this explain and analyze, and then explain and analyze here. And so it's doing 2 things. The explain plan is one portion of it, and the analyze functionality is the other. The analyze is the first block of information here, and that tells you, basically that's specific to our data warehouse, and it's saying, how efficient is your query? Are there things in your query that maybe might make it run slow, or pull a ton of data that maybe isn't what you want, or maybe it looks to see if you have hard-coded dates in your code that maybe you didn't mean to do that. So that's kind of more about efficiency. And then the explain plan itself, that's where it gets into the syntax of your SQL. And are all the tables that you listed in your query actual tables in the data warehouse, or do you have any typos in those? Are the columns actually in those tables, or maybe you mixed something up or you typed something wrong? Are you missing a character here or there? Is there a comma where there shouldn't be? That type of information. It checks all of those and gives you stuff that looks like this, lots of rows of information, and I wouldn't worry too much about the rows of information other than did it show up or not. If it showed up, then your query should be meeting all syntax requirements. So this one did. So that's what happens when it's good. Statement conforms to all rules. Explain plan returned a list of operations it's going to follow to run your query, so we're good. Now, let me screw it up so that we can start to see what it looks like when it's not so good. So I'm going to take the underscore out of the table name. And so it should, when I hit explain and analyze, say that the table or view does not exist. So a lot of what the explain plan will return are these ORA errors. So they're universal Oracle errors. So sometimes, if you get a weird one, sometimes I'll just Google it because it's not an Amazon-specific thing. It's the code for that Oracle error for that type of syntax issue or SQL issue. So you can get more information sometimes from external sites. Sometimes it's fairly explicit, like this is telling me that table didn't exist. Sometimes it's even more explicit. So say the table was fine, but maybe I change a column name so it's not a column in that table. I run it again. And here it's giving me a different ORA error, and it's telling me specifically that pg.product grouping is not a valid identifier for a column. So that's a little bit more specific. I can search for that column in my SQL, and obviously not much to search here, but when your queries get bigger, sometimes it gets harder to find what's wrong. And I'm like, oh, okay, that must be what's wrong. Oh, yeah, that's not product grouping. That should be just product group, and I can fix it. Sometimes the errors get a little more vague, and I'll show you a tool that can help you pinpoint the problem. So here we get a different ORA error, a different Oracle error that says the from keyword is not found or expected. So basically, Oracle is, as it's working through evaluating the query, it reached a point where it expected the from to start, and it didn't find from, and so it doesn't know what's going on. And so in this case, a common reason for this from keyword not found or expected error is that you've got a extra comma or a missing comma in your select clause. In this case, I had pulled out the comma between the columns. And so it's hitting this point and thinking, okay, there should be a from here because there's no more commas. There's no more expressions. So, but say your query was way, way, way more complicated and it gave you that error. Maybe you had like 50 columns and complicated expressions and things. There's another tool outside of the business intelligence space called VDBA. It's the Virtual Database Administrator. And this has its own explain plan. This is something not in the training manual. But you can paste in your SQL that you would be running in the ETL manager. You can paste it in here, and then you just have to tell it what database that would be running against. And I always pick DW7, so that's one of the instances of the data warehouse space. So DW7 in database, drop your SQL in here, and hit run explain plan. And wait a minute. There we go. And so we get that same error from keyword not found where expected, but then it says the error is possibly near this little asterisk inside greater than less than. And then it'll show us our SQL, and it'll show us where it thought the error started. Like at what point as it was running through the SQL did it error out. And so it can kind of pinpoint for you exactly where the error is, which gets very, very handy. So someday I hope that the ETL manager explain plan will include that functionality. I think it's on their list, so someday. But for now, you can pop over into the VDBA explain plan and figure out what was wrong, and then, okay, fix it, and go back to ETL manager. Let's see. Oops, that's not what I want. There I go again. Okay. So sort of hopping back into the explain plan, there's one more thing that I'll screw up about this query. And don't worry so much about the SQL part of it. This is more to illustrate the other section. So the other section, the analyze, so far everything we've done is conform to all the ETL manager rules. This one, through a major priority error that there's a conditionless join detected. Basically, I told it that I want to query two tables, but I didn't tell them how I should join the tables together. So it's going to do what's called a merge join Cartesian, which is usually bad. About 99% of the time it's bad. It would make your query run for a really, really long time because it's matching every row in one table to every row in the other table in a completely haphazard way. Anyway, something to definitely avoid, which is why it's categorized as major. That little detail button to the right will show you a little bit more information about what that error means. Let's see if I can force some of the other types of errors that pop up there. Let's see. All right. There we go, got 3 of them, a major and 2 minor. So the first one's a major one. It's telling me that I should use partition columns when querying the following tables. It's basically I'm not including some where clause conditions that I should for that table. Next week we'll talk about partitions, and that error will make more sense, and how to avoid it will be clear, hopefully. Also through the rows returned greater than 10 million error, which is considered a minor error. Lots of times that's a completely valid thing that you're going to be querying more than 10 million rows. And then finally, the query scans more than 2,000 partitions, also considered a minor error, and also something that I'll explain how to avoid next week. So the top section's really about efficiency. The bottom section's about syntax and whether the query will actually even execute. So, yeah, all right. So now, the best tool ever released arguably by the business intelligence team. This was released a couple years ago, and it made writing SQL in the data warehouse so much simpler. This BI metadata tab. So pretty much anywhere within the data warehouse that you are, you'll see this BI metadata tab. And clicking on it will always open in a new tab or in a new window, so it won't screw up whatever you're doing. Here we go. And BI metadata is basically the wiki or dictionary of all the tables and columns in data warehouse, with a wealth of information provided both by the people that owned the tables and in some cases by other people adding comments to let you know something odd about a table or information that will help you query it better. There's several tabs within it. We're going to start with just doing some searches because that's probably what initially you'll be using the most. And so this search box up here, you can enter just about anything in there, and it will look for table names that have that string in it. It'll look for descriptions of tables. It'll look for column names. It'll look for descriptions of columns. It'll look for questions that people asked that have that text string in it. So it's very robust. We're going to start with a known table, though, to kind of focus our results a little bit. So I'm going to enter the table name DMPASIN brand manufacturer. It's one of the tables listed in the back of your training manual that kind of the commonly used in the retail org tables. And we'll just go ahead and do that. Let's see, I guess I'll click go. There we go. Maybe. Wouldn't this be a hilarious time for this functionality to stop working?
Mine isn't going
Mine
either.
Oh, man. The greatest tool ever released. Let's see. Wow. Okay. Well, let's skip that for now. There we go. All right. It's just maybe all of us clicking it at the same time caused a problem. So it's going to create a sort of a second wave of tabs down here below. And this is sort of your results tabs. So it found 3 tables that maybe are a match. It found 2 columns that maybe are a match for that text string. That doesn't mean there's only 2 columns in that table. It means that there's only 2 columns that have that text string in their name or in their description. It didn't find this table anywhere in any DSS UIs, so this might be a table that you can only access through ETL Manager. And it also didn't find any business questions, but I'll make sure we find examples at least of that last one. So we're on the Tables tab. So these are the 3 tables it found. It found DMP ASIN brand manufacturer, some deprecated thing that's crossed out, so don't ever probably use those. For some reason, it's the same name, but yeah, I don't know what that's about. And then it found DMP ASIN manufacturer, so missing brand. And that one returned because the description of it references the one with brand in it, because this is the new table and this is the old table. So sometimes they'll release a new table that replaces an existing one, and they had to make enough changes to the table that they want to create a new table. So it can get a little confusing. But so to learn more about let's look at if we click on the columns tab, we'll see which 2 columns it returned. Oh. Guess it's good that I'm talking fast today. There we go. So it returned 2 columns. They're actually both the same. It's the manufacturer code column from that table, in fact, and it returned because the description includes, must include, yeah, there it is, DMP ASIN brand manufacturers in that description of that column. More often, though, go back to the Tables tab, what we care about is the columns in that table. So we can go ahead and just click on that table name, and then we get to learn more about that table. And there's a few pages within that are really useful. Yeah.
So I have a question. Because often when somebody else is sending me a query and we're trying to figure out why 2 queries don't match, they're like, this query, this table is like, one of them was like OWBRCP, and then the one was like OCOAP transactions. And they're like, the logic used for OCOAP transactions and the logic used for OWBRCP are different. And so naturally the tables, even if you query the same columns and the same rows, the results are going to be different. A, what does that mean? And B, how do you determine? Same thing with like joins. Oftentimes people are like, these tables calculate things differently. So how do you know? I mean, we would just like look for a column. I'd be like, oh, here's a column I need from this table. Perfect. Throw it in a table, and then it may spit out a different value in the same column in a different table.
Yeah, so that certainly is possible that the same column can be found in multiple tables, and you really have to sort of understand a table before you can accurately query it, and so and you have to understand it to be able to join it to other tables correctly. BI metadata helps with that, but some of it is just like working with the table and like pulling some data out of it and seeing, okay, what is this table like, and how is it different from this other table maybe that I've been using in the past. Yeah.
How does it get created? And I don't even understand. I get how we like search them, interact, and build them, but what is creating these tables?
So tables within the data warehouse are generally created as copies of production tables or as denormalized versions of multiple production tables joined together and pulling out data from multiple places and putting it all in one table, so it's easier for us to query out of the data warehouse. Sometimes there's very similar tables. Maybe one's aggregated at a different level than another, and maybe they use the same source, but maybe there's a subtle difference in how the tables are loading. In theory, if they're different, then there's probably very different uses for them. But Yeah, I'm not sure I'm answering the question fully, but I'm not sure I have a full answer.
It seems to me like you'd have to find the teams that are populating those.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the
And
solution.
talk to them about what they're putting in there and
Yeah, and I'll talk more about some other ways to get help at the end of class today, but ETL users, that mailing list, like if you're ever not sure about, I don't know which table I'm supposed to be using, why is my query running weird, why am I getting these odd results, sending an email to that list that's clearly says what you're looking for is a great way to get help. It's basically everybody who's using the ETL manager worldwide, and so someone's bound to notice your email and give it a try to answer it. So then we'll talk about some more tools and ways to get help in a little while.
Are there a default database where it is searching for those table names? Because at times I search for a lot of tables which are in from the valid queries, and I don't find any results for that.
So this contains all tables that are in the data warehouse proper. If you're using queries that include vert tables, which we don't really cover in this class, vert tables are not in here. They're in their own table space.
Okay, any table that starts with OIH, I don't find it here.
Is it? Let's follow up after class with some specifics to see why that is. But this contains every table in data warehouse in the Booker data space, which is all of data warehouse excluding verts. So we can look at the specific examples. So when we click on the table, it brings us first to this kind of high-level information about the table. It reiterates the table name, gives us a description, which I think was on the other page anyway, shows us the user description. So if someone, you or I or anybody wants to edit that to say, oh, hey, don't use this table, use this table instead, or when you're querying this table, be sure that you put this filter in place, otherwise your results will be really weird. It's going to tell us partitions on that table, which we'll talk more about next week, what type of partitioning. And that's, for the most part, that's what we got there. Oh, no, sorry. There we go. It's also got how many rows are in that table estimated. So last time it kind of checked that table, how many rows did it find? It says what the data retention policy, can be a big deal in certain tables. This one, the data retention is all, so you don't have to worry. Some tables, because of the volume of the data, they only save like the last 14 days, or they save the last 30 days of daily snapshots, and then weekend and month-end snapshots prior to that. So it's that knowing that data retention can tell you whether you can even get the data that you want to get out of that table. If it's not all, then you can't go back to 1995 data and find out, what customers were ordering back then, potentially. It tells what type of table it is. This is a dimension table. Let's see so every little thing in data warehouse these days pretty much has these little question marks next to them that hopefully explain a little bit more. So that's a great tool to use. If you don't know what something is, you can kind of see a little bit more about it. This is the definition of, it doesn't tell us much more, unfortunately. Example types of tables are fact or dimension. So this is a dimension table, it says. And then the status of the table, some of them are inactive. There are some tables that are marked as active that technically aren't really active tables. They aren't the tables you should be using. So don't rely too heavily on that. You got some primary key columns. So these are, the combination of these, you'll only find one record in this table that has the same value in all three of these columns. So for every region and marketplace, there'll only be one record for each ASIN. But there might be two records for the same ASIN for different marketplaces, for example. And it's got recommendation of query keys, meaning these are columns that they recommend that you include a where clause condition on. Do you have a question?
Is there a resource where you can find the typical queries run?
Yep, I'll cover those. Yeah, yep. So probably there's a lot of questions that are in your minds right now, and if we can, I'm going to cover a lot of different tools today. So the faster we do that, then the more we get to cover, probably. But if something that I'm talking about doesn't make sense, definitely stop me. You've also got down here associated business questions. So users like me and others, like you potentially someday, have asked a question, found an answer, and then posted it in this business questions section and tied it to a specific table. So we'll see if there are any. Whoops. So we click on that and open it. Then we see that there is a question. Someone asked, how do I map an ASIN to a vendor or brand code? And it's in it defines what subject area that's in, or areas, and who did it and when they wrote it. And so if we actually click on that, I think this actually answers your question a bit. This isn't helping much with keeping keeping things running. So clicking on that should bring up that actual business question. And most commonly, business questions, someone's asked that question, and then they say, OK, this is how I found the answer to this question. Here's some sample SQL that I used. Wow. Sorry about this. While that's running, I will kick something else off here. Up here, there's this show columns and sample data. So often that's our next step. We want to know, OK, what are all the, of course, before I could do it. All right, so now it's on the business question. So here's the business question information. Someone asked, how do I map an ASIN to a vendor or brand code? And the answer is you can run into the situation where blah, 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 blah. There's some SQL. This is the table or tables that are associated with this answer and question. And so this is one way to find sample SQL that may give you a starting point instead of having to start from scratch and do a lot of testing and pulling a lot of data. That's one tool that's out there. And we'll look at another one in another business question case in a second. Most often, though, we're going to the table, and then we're going to say, OK, what are the columns in that table? And here we go. So we click on that Show Columns. And it's going to list all the columns here. And let's see, it's in a little scrolling window of lots and lots. And so it tells us down here there's 15 columns in this table. I think it defaults to showing you maybe the first 25 or 50 columns in that table. But you can change that to all here, and it'll tell you how many it's showing you on the page. There's also this great little filter box in the upper right, similar to on the My Jobs tab that we looked at last week. And anything you start typing in there, it'll start filtering results down. So maybe I'm interested in brand, so I type brand in the filter, and it's now filtered down to 6 rows in the table that have the word brand somewhere either in the column name or in the description of the column. And so here we've got brand code, brand name, et cetera. And so you can quickly find columns you're looking for, information about those columns. There's a great description for every column, what the data type is. And so every column in every table has a data type. It's usually one of 3 things: a number, a character string, or a date. And knowing that can help you know, like if it's a character string, then you know you have to put those single quotes around any values in that when you're writing where clause conditions. If it's a date, then you know it's a date and not a text string. You know, these are all char and varchar, which are all character strings that we have filtered down to brand. But if I remove that filter, there we go. We've got region, which is a number. Marketplace ID, that's a number. ASIN is a character string of 10 digits long. Yep.
What would the difference be between number and number with the parentheses after?
Yeah, so the number, the stuff in parentheses, I think if I remember right, the first is what the length of that string, that number could be. So it's going to be no more than 2 digits. And then I think the comma 0 means that there's no decimal places, nothing to the right of the decimal place, so it's always going to be an integer. If that was a 1, then I think it could have something in the 10th place, that type of thing. That's a good question, though. Yeah, so you can use this. You can sort any of these. So if you're looking, it doesn't sort initially alphabetically by column name. It puts the primary keys and things at the top first. But if you're looking for, you just want to scroll through everything, you can alphabetize it. You can sort by data type if for some reason that made sense.
Why would an ASIN be a character string, but a GL code would be a number?
Because the GL codes are 14, 15, 27, 74. They're all numbers. An ASIN can have B's and letters. So a character string is anytime you could have letters in a mix. Definitely. Let's see. I think, oops. Having trouble seeing my scroll bar. I guess if I look at my own screen. All right. If there were associated DSS UI reports that you could use, you could click here to see that. You can also see a little bit of sample data by clicking on that sample data. So if you're curious, okay, what kind of values are in these fields? Like, great that it, brand code's a character string, but like, what kind of character string might I find in the brand code field? You can see that or start to get a sense of that from the sample data. So I can see, oh, okay, they tend to be these 5-character long, they're all capitals, that type of thing. And GL product group, okay, I can see that these ones are all, for some reason, they're all 14 in the sample. The sample data usually pulls like the first, I think, 10 rows from the table. So it's usually, for tables that have a full and all data retention, those rows tend to be very, very old rows. I'm not sure if we have any dates in here. No, because this is a newly created table with lots of old data in it. So let's see, what else is there in There's so much in BI metadata that I want to make sure I cover as much as I can. I'm going to click back to the table and see if this is working. This was broken yesterday, but if we click on this Show Data Flow, there we go. It shows us where the data in this table is coming from. So if I think a question kind of came up, like how do we understand the table? You can start to see like how's the data in this table being added to this table by looking. Usually the green one is a transform. And then this gives you, this is the ETL query that someone wrote to load information into the table. And sometimes often they're very complex, but sometimes they're simpler, and sometimes that can be a good tool to figure out, like, where's the data for this table coming from? And also, who last updated the load of this table, and maybe that person or that team is someone that I could contact to find out more about this table. And close that out, though. All right. So let's do another search. This time, maybe I'm interested in that concept of the owning vendor code, and every ASIN is owned by some vendor code. So I'm going to just throw the keyword owning up there and see what I get. Eventually. There we go. So in this case, I found one table and 65 columns. No business questions. I look at this table, and it definitely doesn't really look like what some daily variations reporting. I don't think that's really what I want. So let's look at what columns. I'm going to sort by column name. And I see that owning vendor code and owning vendor name come back as columns. So that's probably what I'm looking for. So then now I need to figure out which since there's a lot of them, I have to figure out which table's the one I want. And some of this is just as you start to become familiar with the commonly used tables, the one that you actually need will stick out to you a little bit more. But you can sort of look through and see, this one's glance weekly something metrics. This is monthly. That's probably not it. Buyer effectiveness, probably not it. Basically, if you cross-reference this with the list in the back of your training manual, that'll help you kind of identify, okay, that's a table. And you might have noticed on this list is DMP ASIN brand manufacturer, the table that we were looking at just a minute ago. And so that's probably the table I want to use if I want to find out the owning vendor code and owning vendor name for a specific ASIN in a specific marketplace. So that's sort of...
So the W that begins these.
That's a great question. Yeah, so you'll notice most of the tables start with some sort of single letter preface. You've got O, S, D. Sometimes there's A and R. Most of the time, you're going to be querying tables that start with D. Sometimes you'll be querying tables that start with O. It's unlikely you'll be querying tables that start with S or A or R. The D stands for denormalized. So those are cases where they took a bunch of production tables, joined them, and put all the results in one table, so it's easier for you to use. You don't have to do the joins yourself. The O tables tend to be sort of more, I think, fact tables. They tend to be sort of like an Excel equivalent would be sort of that you might VLOOKUP against that table to find out certain attributes of maybe an ASIN or attributes of a vendor or something like that. So most of the time, D tables is what you're going to use. Oh, also not W tables. That's in the no category. There are obviously exceptions to all these things. There's reasons all these tables exist, but a lot of them are more sort of, they're there as an intermediary step in creating maybe a D table or an O table or something like that. Let's see. Let's do one other search. We have, well, actually, let's skip that because I just realized we have 6 minutes. So let me show you kind of on a related note. I'll send this wiki out after class. But I threw this together yesterday because a lot of the time, the table you're looking for is like, I have an ASIN and there's some attribute of an ASIN that I care about, and there's lots of tables that have ASIN attributes in them. So this was my attempt at putting a lot of those in one place to help you find, I really need to know who the buyer is for this manufacturer code or who the buyer is for this category or subcategory. Oh, buyer, that's in the DIM party mappings table and the field is party name, and I should make sure that I have a where clause condition that I limit this column to the string buyer. So this isn't obviously exhaustive, but hopefully it helps in certain cases where you're looking for a specific ASIN attribute. Let's see. Let's jump to, if we have a very quick few minutes to look at some troubleshooting thoughts here. So sometimes your jobs error out. They don't always run super smoothly. Even sometimes they pass explain plan and they'll still error out. Getting to the information about why they errored out isn't always intuitive. And so I'll show you quickly a couple tools for that. Anywhere you find this little stopwatch icon in Data Warehouse, that'll take you to a list of all of the jobs that have run, or the job runs for that job. So by clicking on that, it'll take me to a list of previous jobs that have run. And it'll tell me information like how many rows were processed when the query ran. These are all successful. But in theory, if one wasn't, actually, I bet I can quickly find one that wasn't. I'm going to go to the DWP console. That's going to show me all kind of a summary of job runs. And here I can find a couple jobs that errored out. Click on the number to see the jobs that errored. So then I'm going to click on the run ID, and this is going to take me to that job run detail page, all the information about this specific job run for that query. And the front page says error, which is helpful, but then it gives you this information, which is not what you need. So there's two places to check. The first place is go to this job run log tab, and you're going to want to scroll down until you see red. Literally, not just getting angry, but like literally see text that's in red. There we go. All right, so it says your session has been killed. Not super helpful. but at least we know that that the job was killed, and not that there was some problem within the query running specifically. When a job is killed, sometimes it shows up in the job run log. Sometimes you have to go to this Events tab, and that'll tell you a little bit more. This one, it says your job was automatically killed because it hasn't been modified since it was last killed. And so that's a good thing to know about the data warehouse. If your query runs for more than 2 hours, they will kill it. If your query uses way too much temp space, like you're pulling millions and millions of rows of data and then in a subquery or something, or you're using an order by on a massive thing, it will kill your query because you use too much space. If your query has been killed, you have to edit your query before Data Warehouse will let you run that query again. It will, even if your query is scheduled, it's going to just kill it every time until you make a change. So that's one good thing to know about that. But then what do you do once you've changed the SQL or that type of thing? Over here on the job run log, there's some options to, maybe you want to restart the job. Maybe the only problem was that it errored during publishing, which you would see on the job run log. It would say post-process error, publishing, blah, blah, blah. If it just failed to publish, you can fix the publisher and then just hit republish. They've got your results saved. If your query made it past, if it got to the point of creating results and just couldn't save them somewhere, you can republish without it having to rerun the whole query, which is nice. You can force a query into a success or error state. You can delete a query job run. You can hello restart, which the difference between restart and hello restart is restart saves all the information, all these events that have already happened. Hello restart basically deletes this job run and creates a whole new job run, starts from scratch. So subtle difference. There's a few more buttons here. The kill session, if your query gets stuck in executing and you're like, oh my God, I know what I did wrong. This is going to run for 2 hours. It's so embarrassing. You can come in here and hit the kill session, tell it why you want to kill the session, and that'll stop it from continuing to execute. So that's probably all that we can hit today, other than one last tab to look at, this Contact Us tab. It has some of the tools and resources that are out there for how to ask other people for help, asking the ETL manager users, using the data warehouse help desk wikis. There's some training videos here on KNet. There's office hours that you can go talk to people that work in BI who can help you with your SQL. Most of the time, you don't want to be opening a remedy ticket unless you find something wrong with a table. It's not a way to get help from writing queries. So I'm sure you guys probably have to take off. So thank you.